Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaskar. Today we will be continuing with our discussion on the various theories of selling. This is our lecture number 19, which is the fourth lecture in the fourth module. And if you recall, in the previous lecture we were speaking about the theories of selling, where we discussed the idea theory of selling and the right set of circumstances theory of selling, which were the two seller oriented approaches to selling. Thereafter we also did the buying formula theory of selling, which is a buyer oriented or a buyer approach to the theories of selling. Today we shall be moving on with our discussion on the various theories of selling, and we shall be talking about one theory which is a buyer and a seller oriented, both, a combination of both, which is the behavioral equation theory. And then we shall also be speaking about spin selling, which is actually a methodology. It is not a theory, but it is a methodology as to how to bring about successful sales. So let us begin with our discussion on the behavioral equation theory. Now, the behavioral equation theory was proposed by Professor Howard from the Columbia Graduate School of Business, and it bases itself on the findings of behavioral research. It is a combination of both a buyer and a seller oriented theory of selling, and based on behavioral research it uses the stimulus response model. In one way it is also a refined form of the right set of circumstances theory. So the behavioral equation theory, which bases itself on behavioral research, uses the stimulus response model, and we have seen earlier when we did the right set of circumstances theory, that there itself also we saw that there was a combination of the stimulus and the response. However, the behavioral equation theory uses the right set of circumstances theory in a more refined form. So it is in a way a refined form of the right set of circumstances theory. Now here buying behavior is explained as a purchase decision process and as various phases of learning which happen on the part of the buyer. The theory bases itself on four elements of the learning process, which is 1 drives, 2 cues, 3 response, and 4 reinforcement. So this particular theory, the behavioral equation theory, is explained as a purchase decision process and as phases of learning, and what it incorporates is 4 different elements of learning, which are drives, cues, response, and reinforcement. Now let us talk a little more on these 4 elements and let us see what they mean. Now what are drives? Drives are strong internal stimuli that motivate a response from a buyer. Now these drives are internal stimuli that actually motivate a buyer to respond in a particular manner. They motivate a response from the buyer, and these drives could be either innate or learned. Now innate drives are physiological in nature and they pertain to our physiology. They arise from our physiology, for example, need for food, water, sleep. So we have hunger, thirst, sleep. These are all innate drives which move a person towards a particular response. The second kind of drives which we have are called learned drives. Now learned drives are psychological in nature. They arise out of our psychology. For example, the need for esteem, the need for status, etc. Second, now the second element here in learning is cues. Now cues are weak stimuli that affect as to when a buyer will react or when a buyer will respond to a particular stimuli. So these cues can be further classified as triggering cues and non-triggering cues. Now what are triggering cues? Triggering cues are those which initiate a purchase process for a particular product or service. So they instantaneously make a consumer react or respond to the stimuli. So these are weak stimuli that will initiate a purchase decision process for a particular product or a service, and so the triggering cues initiate the buyer to respond now or to act now. So they initiate a purchase decision process for a particular product or service in the mind of the consumer. The consumer reacts or responds towards the purchase or towards the intention to purchase. Now, what are non-triggering cues? Non-triggering cues also influence the purchase decision for a product or service, but they do not initiate it. They are non-triggering as the term goes. If we see, triggering is something which will immediately make somebody act, immediately make somebody respond or react. But non-triggering cues are those which influence a purchase decision process for a product or for a service offering, but they do not initiate it. They may operate any time, even if the buyer is not thinking of a purchase, even if he does not realize he has a need. And these non-triggering cues again could be further categorized into product cues and informational cues. Again, I would emphasize upon the difference of the triggering and the non-triggering cues. Cues are weak stimuli that will affect as to when the buyer will respond. Triggering cues will make a consumer or make a buyer react immediately, respond immediately. They will initiate the purchase process for a particular product or service. Non-triggering cues are those which will influence the decision process anytime, but they will not initiate it. They may operate at any point in time, even when the buyer is not thinking of a purchase, and these non-triggering cues could be again categorized into two, which are product cues and informational cues. Now, what are product cues? Product cues are those which are external stimuli related to and received from the product. For example, the packaging of the product, the size of the product, the color of the product, the smell of the product, the size of the product. So, these are all external stimuli related to and received from the product. Received by whom? Received by the consumer or the buyer. So, the buyer receives a product cue. Now, again, this product cue is something which is external to and related to the product, and they are external stimuli, and they may or may not initiate the decision process for a buyer, because these are non-triggering in nature. Of course, they may suddenly get triggered, as even when the buyer is not thinking of a purchase. The second kind of cues which we have are the informational cues. Now, informational cues are external stimuli pertaining to the symbolic nature of the product. They are not internal to they are again external stimuli, but they do not pertain to the product as such or the product features or attributes. But on the other hand, they pertain to the symbolic nature of the product. For example, information received from advertisements or from salespersons or from word of mouth from others. Okay, so these become very symbolic in nature and are typically more to do with it's typically to do with information which gives or talks about the symbolic nature of the product. So these are external stimuli pertaining to the symbolic nature of the product. Okay, information received from advertisements. Now, advertisements we all know will not only talk about the product, maybe about the attributes, features, but they will also have a creative strategy, an executional framework where there will be a lot of drama, there will be colors, there will be music, there will be jingles, and the positioning of the product also gets affected by the way the advertisement has been designed. Similarly, salespeople may talk about both the functionality of the product as well as the emotional benefits or the symbolic benefits that the product brings about. And again, word of mouth communication which takes place between consumers when they share information or give advice to each other or share experiences. In all these cases also, a lot of information that is shared is very symbolic in nature. So these are a part of what we refer to as informational cues. Now, both product cues and informational cues are actually referred to as non-triggering cues because they are weak stimuli. They may operate anytime, even when the buyer is not thinking of a purchase process. They will influence a purchase decision, but they may not immediately initiate it. So this is the difference. These are both product cues and informational cues. Now, sometimes both product and informational cues may also act as triggering cues. They may become triggering, for example, in case of sales promotion where there are deals and discounts and prices suddenly drop. In those cases, the consumer may rush towards the nearest store to buy a particular product or a service offering, or he may order online and so forth. Similarly, in the case of impulse buying also, the product cues, the color of the product or the packaging of the product, or again in case of deals and discounts, suddenly people decide to act on impulse and they go in for impulse purchase even without planned for it or having the need for it as such. So it is more of a impulse purchase, and so this again in this way prices and discounts could also as informational cues, they may act as triggering cues. So this is what we mean by what cues are. Now the third element that we have in the learning, which actually is incorporated into the theory, is the response. Now response is the reaction of the prospect or an actual and existing buyer. So it is the reaction which comes from a buyer, whether he is a prospective buyer or whether he is an actual buyer. And the fourth element which we have here is reinforcement. Now reinforcement is defined as an event that intensifies the buyer's predisposition towards making a particular response. So we have response in the form of a reaction from the buyer, whether he is an existing buyer or a prospective buyer, and we have reinforcement, which is actually an event that intensifies the buyer's predisposition towards making a particular response. Now according to the theory, we have a response or an internal response tendency from the buyer, which is equivalent to the predisposition or the inward response tendency or the habit, multiplied by the present drive level or the motivation, multiplied by the incentive potential or the value of the product, which will bring in potential satisfaction, multiplied by the intensity of the cues, whether they are triggering cues or non-triggering cues. Now that is how Howard proposed an equation, and he said that B is equal to P multiplied by D multiplied by K multiplied by V. Now what is B? B is the response or the internal response tendency, which is the act of purchasing a particular product or a company's product or a brand, and this internal response tendency is equal to a person's predisposition or inward response tendency, which is habit, multiplied by the drive level or the motivation, which is D, multiplied by the value of the product or the potential satisfaction he sees in terms of as an incentive potential which he sees in the product, multiplied by the intensity of all the cues, whether they are triggering cues or non-triggering cues, which is V. So what Howard proposed is a multiplicative relationship, and in case any of the elements is 0, there would be no response or no internal response from the buyer or from the prospective buyer. So he said that for a particular response to occur, it is important that there is a predisposition which is also matched or which goes along with the level of motivation, which again goes along with an incentive potential or the value of the product in terms of potential satisfaction which a customer sees or a prospective customer sees in the product, and which is again multiplied by the cues which he actually receives, and it is the strength of the cues which constitutes the V. So this is how he explained. Now the salesperson has a very vital role to influence P, D, K and V. The salesperson can influence the predisposition or the inward response tendency. He can influence the present drive level or the motivation. He can influence the incentive potential or the value of the product in terms of the potential satisfaction that a customer is seeking. He can also give strength to the cues, whether they are triggering cues or non-triggering cues. So in this way the salesperson can influence all the elements. He can influence the predisposition by interacting with the customer, explaining how the attributes of the product can be rewarding to the buyer. He can actually affect or influence the predisposition by showing a need benefit linkage, by providing information cues especially in the case of first time purchase. He can actually increase the level of motivation or have an influence on D, which is motivation. In case of repeat and routine purchases, he can also have influence the triggering cues, which again would increase the level of motivation or D. Similarly, he can impact the K by making his brand to appear more superior to those of the competitors, and so in this way he would be talking about the incentive potential. And finally, he can also influence the V or the intensity of cues by bringing about a change in the intensity of his efforts, both in terms of product cues, both in terms of informational cues, in terms of triggering and in terms of non-triggering cues. So this is how Howard explained the behavioral equation theory, where he spoke about the response and the stimulus and the circumstances in the right set of circumstances in a more refined manner. Concept which is spin selling. Now spin selling here is not a theory, it is a customer communication focused sales methodology, which we will see is used worldwide, and it's become very popular as a way of conducting fruitful transactions, and as a way of building very successful buyer-seller dyads. Now the concept of spin selling was proposed by a person by the name of Neil Rackham, and Neil Rackham was the former president and the founder of the Huthwaite Corporation. This concept called spin selling was first published in 1998, and what he wrote and explained was a result of a careful observation and an extensive research conducted by him over a period of 12 years, and with a sample of 35,000 sales calls. So his findings were published in the form of a book, and this particular concept emphasizes upon the importance of asking the right questions in a sales process, and to focus more on how should one lead conversations with customers so as to result in fruitful consequences. Now spin selling is a communication focused sales methodology which trains salespersons to ask the right kind of question so that the prospect would be able to understand that the salesperson's product or service offering is the right solution to their problem. So what Neil Rackham emphasized upon was that it's very important for salespersons to ask the right set of questions, and this right set of questions in the sales process would in a way lead from one stage to the other, and in this form through this communication focused methodology, salespersons would be able to ask this understand the customer better, and they would be able to show how their product or service offering is the right solution to the customer's problem, instead of the salesperson explaining that this would be the best solution. The buyer or the prospect would himself be able to realize that the salesperson's product or service offering is the best solution. So it is not the salesperson who would say that yes, my product meets your need and will help solve your problem, but it is the buyer or the prospective buyer who would himself realize through the kind of questions which the salesperson would ask, the prospect would be able to realize that yes, what the prospect or what the salesperson is offering me is the solution to my problem. So Neil Rackham emphasized upon the importance of asking the right questions in the sales process. That means how should one lead conversations with their customers, and asking the right questions so that the prospect would be able to understand that the salesperson's product or service offering is the right solution to his problem. Now the term spin is an acronym for the 4 kinds of questions that salespersons must put forth: situation questions, problem questions, implication questions, and need payoff questions. Now according to Neil Rackham, a successful sales call is one where the buyer talks more, and this implies that the salespersons are the one who are going to ask questions and then listen. The asking of such questions implies a rapport building between the salesperson and the prospect, and building of this sales rapport would make the buyer feel even more comfortable to further talk. So according to Neil Rackham, the salesperson should be the ones asking questions. The buyers must answer, and it is the job of the salesperson to listen. So conversations where the salesperson will mostly listen and buyers will talk will be the ones which will have the highest close win rate. Now, the fundamental takeaway from spin selling is that the key to a successful, to a successful sales lay in the quality of the questions which are asked by a salesperson. An appropriate question would speed up the selling process. On the other hand, an inappropriate one would slow it down or would terminate it completely. So, according to Neil Rackham, it is important that the salespersons talk less, they listen more. It is the prospect who should talk more. The salesperson's job is to ask the right kind of questions and they'll listen to the replies which are being made by the prospects. The buyer will talk more. It would mean a rapport building. The rapport building would also mean that the buyer would be comfortable to talk even more. And the key to the successful sales would lie in the right kind of questions which are asked by the salesperson. An appropriate question would speed up the selling process, while an inappropriate one would slow it down or would terminate it completely. Now, conversations where the salespersons mostly listened, asked questions and then listened, okay, and let the buyers talk were the ones which had the highest close win rate. So, for a sales process or a sales call to be effective, it was important that the right kind of questions were posed by the salesperson, and then who then would assume the role of a listener, and where such situations where the salespersons majorly listened and let the buyers talk were the ones which were going to be more successful. Now, let us discuss what these different kinds of questions could be. First is what we have, the situation questions. Now, the situation questions are the ones which start a conversation. So, they form the starting point of a conversation between the salesperson and a prospect. Such questions basically concentrate on collecting information and facts about the prospect's current situation. So, the objective of the salesperson here is to develop an understanding of the prospect and his precise situation and to establish the context of further dialogue, that is to identify the problems and the pain points that the prospect is going through. Now, to encourage questions from the prospect so that a solution can be presented later, so work backward from problems a product can solve for a buyer, and so it's important to generate such questions. Now, it's also important to understand that situation questions are the least important and the least powerful of the 4 questions, and they have very less impact on the outcome of the overall discussion. The more of such asked in a sales call, the less likely that a sales would happen. So, it's very important that the salespersons concentrate very little on the situation questions, and in order to lessen these questions, the salesperson must plan well. How would they be able to do that? They would be able to do that by learning about a prospect's current processes, resources, results and problems. So in this way, they would have lesser situation questions to ask, and it is always best to ask less situation questions, because the situation questions have lesser impact on the overall outcome, and they are least powerful or the least impactful. However, situation questions will provide the information one needs to address the rest of the questions and take the conversation forward to a fruitful end. So, situation questions provide the information one needs to address the rest of the questions and to take the conversation forward to a fruitful end. Now, for example, here what the salesperson is trying to do, he is basically trying to talk to the prospect and just inquire on his current state of the kind of problems he is facing or of the kind of problem he is into, and if so in a way he is triggering a dialogue where the prospect would suddenly bring to surface the kind of problem he faces. So this is a situation question which would particularly deal with the kind of problem or the kind of pain point a prospective customer is facing. Second is problem questions. Now, problem questions make the prospect aware of the fact that there is a problem that needs to be taken care of. Situation questions would just lay the background, but the realization of a problem, the realization that there is a problem that must be dealt with, is something which is a problem question. So they deal with the prospect's pain point, the problems, the dissatisfactions, and they encourage the prospect to state their implied needs. Now they also help a prospect identify a problem that has been overlooked or has been in the subconscious. For example, a new pain point will make the prospect look for a solution. This solution ultimately would be the one which lies in the product or service offering which the salesperson has to offer. So the salesperson must ask questions and use subtle techniques to help the prospect realize on his own that there is a problem. This realization would help him act as his own change agent. Okay, so the realization of the problem would pave the way. So if a question is, are you into a problem? If this is a situation question, the problem question would become, do you think this is really a problem and it is impacting your business? So this is the difference. The situation question would just walk off, say, how are things? How are situations? What is the kind of experience these days in the market or in your factory, or the kind of things you're facing? But a problem question becomes, is it really a problem? Do you think so? Is it really bothering you? This kind of a question, when posed by a salesperson, will immediately make the prospect realize, yes, there is something I need to think of and take forward. Okay, so this realization of the problem would pave the way for the sale. So such questions will also help identify potential areas of opportunities where a product or service can help, and they help illustrate the different kinds of problems that the product or service can solve. Questions must be asked with respect to the problem faced by the buyer in such a way that the salesperson can provide a solution to that problem in the end, and that solution again is something which has to be realized by the prospect on his own. Instead of a salesperson saying that yes, I can provide you a solution to the problem, the prospect must be able to understand that what the salesperson sells or is the kind of product he is into is something which will help me solve my problem and is a solution to my problem. So it is again something which is very backwards. The third kind of questions are implication questions. Now, implication questions are those which are meant to make the prospect aware of the seriousness of the problem, the negative consequences of the problem if the problem is left unresolved. So, they basically try to create an urgency in the mind of the prospect. They are intended to make the prospect realize that there is a problem that needs to be taken care of, and if unresolved there could be seriousness. So, they are meant to draw the prospect's attention to the solution, and this would also impel the prospect to act on his own. Now, the implication questions are the most important questions in spin selling, and hence salespersons must really concentrate more on them. They must carefully state such questions, because if they are too negatively stated, there may be perceptual defense on the part of the client or the prospect, and he may just withdraw. So, it is very important for the salesperson to show the seriousness of the problem, or to exhibit or to illustrate how things, to make the prospect realize about the seriousness of the problem, to make the prospect realize that if things are not taken care of, there could be serious issues later. He must make the prospect aware of this fact that left unresolved, the problem could further be a bigger problem. Yet it should not be stated so very fearfully or so very negatively that the prospective or the client or may suddenly withdraw. So the implication questions need to be framed very carefully. So if we had a situation question which was, yes sir, I am here to just understand, so hope things are fine, going on fine in the factory or in the plant. So the problem question is when the prospective customer may say, yeah, there are certain issues, and my production line, my assembly line is getting disrupted due to certain issues. So that's a problem, but then the salesperson must be able to say, oh, is it really a problem, and do you think it's very serious? Yes, if it is serious. So we move to the implication question. An implication question would be, oh really sir, I mean this is something which can bring your create problems in your in final delivery of your product to the end customer. It could be something which the competitor can gain advantage of. It could be something, a shortage of this could mean many of your customers switching over to competitors. So such kind of a question, would it mean that your customers will defect? Would it mean that your customers and your would switch over to the competitor? And do you think it's going to affect your market share? Such a question as an implication question is something which will immediately draw the attention of the client that yes, he must act immediately. So this is what an implication question is. The need payoff questions are meant to make the prospect consider the value of a solution in terms of the benefits, that is the product benefits as a solution to his problem. Now the focus is on the solution of the problem rather than the problem and the implication now. So in this stage, the salesperson must encourage the buyer to realize and state their explicit needs as well as the benefits that the product or service offered by the salesperson can provide. And instead of the salesperson saying that, he must ensure that the buyer realizes it. So rather than the salesperson telling the prospect as to how his product or service can solve the problem, the need payoff questions help a prospect to draw those conclusions on his own. The prospect must himself realize that the product or service offered by the salesperson is something which can help me, the benefits can help me solve a problem, then benefits can help me get rid of the serious implications that may result or that may follow in case I do not act now. So again, it is something which is very, very backward. Now the situation and the problem questions are used to obtain information about the prospect, and the implication of the need payoff questions are those where the prospect realizes that the seriousness of the problem and how a particular product or service offered by a salesperson can help solve the same through the benefit that it entails. Now this brings us to an end of this particular session. The references are still in Kandif, Govoni, Puri, Sales and Distribution Management 2017, Pearson, India, and we have Rackham Spin Selling at McGraw-Hill. So with this we come to an end of the fourth lecture on the fourth module of the course. I hope you found the lecture fruitful.